The mahogany doors of Richardson Industries' executive boardroom burst open without warning, shattering the quiet intensity of the quarterly shareholders' meeting. Two identical teenage boys, maybe 16 or 17, stood in the doorway with mud-stained sneakers and determination etched across their matching faces. Security guards rushed forward, but something about the boys made CEO Marcus Richardson raise his hand, stopping them mid-stride. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The silence in the boardroom was deafening. 23 of the most powerful executives in Chicago sat frozen, their coffee cups suspended halfway to their lips, quarterly reports forgotten in their hands. Marcus Richardson, at 48, commanded respect in every room he entered. His steel-gray eyes had negotiated billion-dollar mergers. His presence had intimidated competitors into submission, yet now those same eyes widened with something between confusion and recognition. The twins were identical in every way that mattered. Same auburn hair that caught the afternoon light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Same piercing green eyes that seemed to look right through. Pretense. Same stubborn jawline that Marcus had seen in old family photographs. Same defiant posture that spoke of desperation disguised as courage. "We're looking for Marcus Richardson," the taller twin announced, though the height difference was barely noticeable. His voice carried the crack of adolescence but held an adult determination that made the security guards hesitate. "That would be me," Marcus replied slowly, setting down his Mont Blanc pen with deliberate precision. His mind was already racing, cataloging every detail of their appearance, searching for logical explanations that his instincts were already rejecting. "And you are?" "I'm Danny Fletcher," the boy replied, stepping forward with protective instincts toward his brother. "This is my twin brother, Jake. We think you might be our uncle." The words hit the boardroom like a physical force. Several board members exchanged glances, while others studied their papers with sudden intensity. Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest that had plagued him since his brother David's death 8 years ago. The guilt, the questions, the unfinished conversations that would never be completed. "Security, please escort these young men to my private office," Marcus instructed, his voice steadier than his racing heartbeat. "We'll continue this meeting tomorrow morning." The board members filed out with whispered conversations and backward glances, leaving Marcus alone with the boys and the weight of possibility. As they walked through the gleaming corridors of Richardson Industries' 42nd floor, Marcus studied the twins from his peripheral vision. Their clothes were clean but clearly second-hand, their sneakers worn thin from walking on city streets, yet they carried themselves with pride, heads high despite their obvious nervousness. Marcus's private office occupied the corner of the building, offering panoramic views of Lake Michigan and downtown Chicago. The twins stood awkwardly near the door, while Marcus settled behind his desk, a massive piece of furniture that had belonged to his father and grandfather before him. Family photographs lined the credenza behind him, including several of David, from their childhood and college years. "Please, sit down," Marcus offered, gesturing to the leather chairs across from his desk. The boys perched on the edge of the seats, clearly uncomfortable with the luxury surrounding them. "You said you think I might be your uncle," Marcus began carefully. "What makes you believe that?" Jake, the quieter twin, reached into his backpack and withdrew a manila envelope worn soft from handling. He slid it across the polished desk. Surface. Inside, Marcus found a collection of documents that made his breath catch. A marriage certificate bearing his brother David's name, birth certificates for Daniel and Jacob Fletcher, listing David Richardson as the father, hospital bracelets from Northwestern Memorial, school records from various Chicago public schools. But it was the photograph that stopped Marcus's world entirely. David, looking impossibly young, stood beside a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She was visibly pregnant, her hand resting protectively on her rounded belly while David's arm encircled her shoulders. On the back, someone had written in David's familiar scrawl, "Sarah and the Twins, Christmas 2007. "Where did you get this?" Marcus whispered, his fingers tracing his brother's face in the photograph. "From our mum's things," Danny replied, his voice softer now. She kept everything in a box under her bed, birth certificates, pictures, letters that were never sent. "Your mother," Marcus said carefully. "Sarah Fletcher. Where is she now?" The twins exchanged a look that spoke of shared grief and premature responsibility. "She died 6 months ago," Jake said quietly. "Cancer. The hospital bills took everything. We've been staying with different friends, but that's not working out anymore." Marcus felt the familiar ache of loss, compounded now by the possibility of family he'd never known existed. "And you decided to come here because..." "Because we have nowhere else to go," Danny admitted, his teenage bravado cracking slightly. "The system wants to split us up, put us in different foster homes. We've been taking care of ourselves since Mom got really sick, but they say we're too young." The honesty in their voices, the raw vulnerability they were trying so hard to hide, reminded Marcus painfully of his own relationship with David. The Richardson brothers had been inseparable as children, partners in mischief and dreams, but success had driven a wedge between them. Marcus had thrown himself into building the family business, while David had chosen a different path, pursuing social work and community organizing. Their last conversation had been an argument. Marcus remembered with fresh guilt. David had asked for a loan to help a struggling community center. Marcus had refused, lecturing his younger brother about fiscal responsibility and practical priorities. They hadn't spoken for 3 months before the accident that claimed David's life. "Tell me about your father," Marcus said, studying their faces for reactions. "What did your mother tell you about David?" The twins' expressions softened with obvious affection. "Mom said he was the kindest man she'd ever met," Jake replied. "That he worked with kids who had nowhere else to turn. She said he wanted to change the world, one person at a time. He used to read to us when we were little," Danny added. "Mom kept some of his books. Poetry, philosophy, stories about heroes who helped people. That sounded like David." Marcus could picture his brother, patient and gentle, reading bedtime stories to twin boys who shared his eyes and stubborn chin. The image brought both comfort and devastating regret. "Why didn't your mother ever contact me?" Marcus asked, though part of him already suspected the answer. The twins exchanged another look before Danny answered. "She tried. We found letters she wrote but never sent. She was afraid you wouldn't believe us, or that you'd think she was after money." Marcus's heart clenched. In the years since David's death, he'd thrown himself into work with even greater intensity, building Richardson Industries into a national powerhouse. His wealth had grown exponentially, making him a target for various schemes and false claims. Sarah Fletcher had probably seen his picture in business magazines, had known about his success, and had assumed he would view her children as threats rather than family. "She was proud," Jake added. "Even when she got sick, even when the bills kept coming, she wouldn't ask for help. She said we were Richardsons, and Richardsons took care of themselves." The statement hit Marcus like a physical blow. Those were his father's words, repeated so often during their childhood that they'd become family doctrine. The irony wasn't lost on him that Sarah, who had never officially been part of the Richardson family, had embraced those values better than he had when it came to his own brother. "Do you have any other family?" Marcus asked. "Grandparents, aunts, uncles on your mother's side?" "Mom was an only child," Danny replied. "Her parents died when we were babies. It's just been the 3 of us for as long as we can remember." Marcus leaned back in his chair, processing the magnitude of what these boys were telling him. If they were David's sons, they were his only remaining family. The Richardson name, the legacy his grandfather had built and his father had expanded, would continue through these two teenagers who'd been surviving on their own for months. But he needed to be certain. Too much was at stake for all of them to proceed on emotion alone. "I want to help you," Marcus said carefully, "but I need to verify what you're telling me. Would you be willing to take a DNA test?" The twins nodded without hesitation. "We expected that," Danny said. "We know this is hard to believe." "It's not that I don't believe you," Marcus clarified, though honesty compelled him to acknowledge his caution. "It's that I need to be absolutely certain before we move forward. If you are David's sons, my nephews, then you're family, and family takes care of family." The hope that flickered in their eyes was almost painful to witness. These boys, who had been forced to grow up too quickly, who had faced loss and uncertainty with remarkable resilience, were allowing themselves to hope for the first time in months. "Where are you staying tonight?" Marcus asked, already reaching for his phone. "There's a youth shelter on the south side," Jake replied. "They let us stay sometimes when they have space." Marcus made a decision that would have seemed impossible that morning. "Not tonight. My driver will take you to the Palmer house. I'll arrange a suite for you while we sort this out." The twins stared at him with identical expressions of disbelief. "We can't afford a hotel like that," Danny protested. "You're not paying," Marcus replied firmly. "Whatever the truth turns out to be, you came to me for help, and I won't have you sleeping in a shelter while we figure things out." As he made arrangements for the boys, Marcus's mind was already working through the implications. If the DNA test confirmed what his heart was already accepting, these twins would become his responsibility. They would need stability, education, guidance. They would need a family. But first, he needed answers. The timeline concerned him. David had died 8 years ago, but the boys were clearly in their teens. If David had been their father, why had he never mentioned them? Why had there been no contact between the brothers during what should have been one of the most important periods of David's life? "One more question," Marcus said, as his assistant knocked on the door to escort the boys to the hotel. "When did your mother and father meet? How long were they together?" The twins looked uncertain. "We're not sure exactly," Danny admitted. "Mom didn't talk about it much. We know they were married, but she kept the certificate hidden. Jake found it after she died. She used to say that Dad had to choose between his family and his work," Jake added quietly. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That he chose work, but he didn't know about us when he made that choice." The statement sent chills down Marcus's spine. He remembered David's increasing distance in the months before his death, his brother's evasiveness about his personal life. There had been hints of a relationship, mentions of someone special, but David had been secretive in a way that had frustrated Marcus at the time. Now, looking at these boys who carried David's features and apparently his values, Marcus wondered if his brother had been protecting Sarah and the twins from the complications that came with being associated with the Richardson name. David had always been idealistic, believing that love should exist independent of wealth and status. He might have kept his family separate from his brother's world to preserve something pure and authentic. As the twins left with his assistant, Marcus stood at his window watching the late afternoon sun reflect off Lake Michigan. The city spread below him, millions of people living their lives, facing their own challenges and revelations. Somewhere out there, for the past 16 years, his nephews had been growing up without knowing their uncle existed. Sarah Fletcher had raised David's sons alone, instilling in them the values their father had believed in, while building a wall between them and the Richardson legacy. Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed his private investigator, Thomas Chen, a man who had helped Richardson Industries navigate various corporate challenges with discretion and thoroughness. "Tom, I need a complete background check," Marcus said without preamble. "Sarah Fletcher, deceased approximately 6 months ago. 2 sons, Daniel and Jacob Fletcher, ages 16. I need everything: medical records, employment history, school records, hospital bills, anything you can find." "How urgent is this?" Tom's voice carried the professional curiosity of someone accustomed to unusual requests. "Expedite everything. And Tom, I need absolute discretion on this one. No leaks, no speculation, just facts." "Understood. Should I start with public records?" "Start wherever you need to. These boys claim to be my late brother's sons. I need to know if that's possible and why I never knew about them." After ending the call, Marcus returned to the documents the twins had left behind. He studied David's face in the photograph, searching for clues about his brother's state of mind. David looked happy, genuinely joyful in a way Marcus hadn't seen since they were children. His arm around Sarah was protective and proud, his expression that of a man who had found something worth protecting. The birth certificates were legitimate, bearing the official seals of Cook County. The hospital bracelets were from Northwestern Memorial, where David had been born 36 years earlier. Every piece of documentation supported the twins' story, yet questions remained. Marcus's secretary knocked and entered with his evening schedule. "Mr. Richardson, you have dinner with the Nakamura delegation at 8. Should I confirm or reschedule?" "Reschedule," Marcus replied without hesitation. "Clear my calendar for the rest of the week. Something important has come up." After she left, Marcus opened his laptop and began searching through old emails, looking for any mention of Sarah Fletcher or references to David's personal life during the relevant time frame. Their correspondence had dwindled in the months before David's death, their relationship strained by philosophical differences and Marcus's increasing focus on business expansion. He found scattered references to David's work with the community center on the south side, the same area where the twins had mentioned staying at a youth shelter. David had been passionate about providing support for at-risk families, single mothers, kids aging out of the foster system. It would have been entirely in character for him to meet Sarah through his work and fall in love with someone who shared his commitment to helping others. As the Chicago skyline began to twinkle with evening lights, Marcus made another call, this one to Dr. Patricia Williams, the family physician who had known both Richardson brothers since childhood. "Marcus," she greeted him warmly. "It's been too long. How are you holding up?" "Patricia, I need to ask you something in confidence. Did David ever mention having children, twin sons?" The silence on the other end was telling. "Marcus, you know I can't discuss patient confidentiality, even about someone who's passed away. These boys showed up at my office today claiming to be David's sons. They have documentation, but I need to understand why David never told me about them." Patricia's sigh was audible. David was always protective of the people he loved. You know how he felt about mixing his personal life with the complications that came with being a Richardson. So you knew. "I can't say more than this, Marcus, but if 2 boys claiming to be David's sons have come to you for help, perhaps you should listen to what they're telling you." The conversation ended, leaving Marcus with more questions, but also with growing certainty. The pieces were falling into place, painting a picture of a brother who had chosen love over family expectations, who had built a life separate from the Richardson legacy to protect the people who mattered most to him. The irony was devastating. David had died believing he was protecting Sarah and the twins from his family's world. never knowing that his death would eventually drive them to seek help from the very brother he'd tried to shield them from. Marcus spent the evening reviewing financial records, calculating what it would take to provide for the twins' immediate needs and long-term security. Private school tuition, college funds, medical coverage, living expenses. The numbers were insignificant compared to his net worth, but the responsibility felt enormous. These weren't just financial obligations. If the twins were David's sons, they represented a second chance at family, an opportunity to honor his brother's memory by caring for the people David had loved most. They also represented a chance for Marcus to understand the brother he'd lost touch with, to learn about the man David had become in the years when they'd grown apart. But Marcus's business instincts, honed by years of navigating corporate challenges, warned him to proceed carefully. The twins' story was compelling, their need genuine, but the stakes were too high for sentiment alone. Richardson Industries was publicly traded, its leadership scrutinized by shareholders and media alike. Any decision about the twins would have implications beyond family matters. Moreover, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that there were still pieces missing from the story. The twins' account of their parents' relationship contained gaps, vague references to choices and separations that didn't fully explain 8 years of silence between brothers who had once been inseparable. As night settled over Chicago, Marcus stood again at his window, looking down at the city where his nephews were spending their first night in luxury accommodations. Tomorrow would bring DNA results, background checks, and decisions that would shape all their futures. The twins had trusted him with their vulnerability, had chosen to believe that family meant something beyond genetics. Now it was his turn to decide what kind of uncle, what kind of man he wanted to be. The photograph of David and Sarah remained. On his desk, a reminder of love and choices and the complicated legacy of family. Whatever tomorrow revealed, Marcus knew that his life had already changed irreversibly. The carefully controlled world he'd built since David's death had been shattered by 2 teenage boys with his brother's eyes and their mother's courage. For the first time in 8 years, Marcus Richardson was no longer alone with his regrets. The question now was whether he was strong enough to build something better from the pieces of the past. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Richardson Industries' executive conference room as Marcus arrived early, coffee in hand and determination in his stride. The DNA results were due today, along with Thomas Chen's background investigation. But first, he wanted to speak with the twins again, to understand more about their lives and what they hoped for from this reunion. Danny and Jake Fletcher arrived precisely at 9 o'clock, escorted by Marcus's assistant. They wore the same clothes from yesterday, neatly cleaned, but clearly their only option. Marcus made a mental note to address their immediate needs regardless of the test results. "Did you sleep well?" Marcus asked, gesturing for them to take seats at the polished conference table. "Better than we have in months," Danny admitted, his usual guardedness softened by a night of actual rest. "The room service breakfast was incredible," Jake added with the enthusiasm of someone unaccustomed to such luxuries. "We've never had food like that." Marcus studied their faces, noting the resemblance to David that seemed even more pronounced in the morning light. The same way of tilting their heads when thinking, the same habit of making eye contact when speaking. Small mannerisms that couldn't be faked or coincidental. "I want to be honest with you both," Marcus began. "Yesterday was a shock. I had no idea you existed, and I'm still trying to understand how that's possible. The DNA results will tell us definitively about your biological connection to my family, but I already believe you're telling the truth." Relief flickered across both faces, though they remained cautious. "However," Marcus continued, "I need to understand more about your parents' relationship. About why David never told me about you, why Sarah never reached out for help, especially when she became ill. The twins exchanged their familiar look of silent communication before Danny spoke. Mom was complicated about Dad. She loved him, that was obvious, but she was also hurt by him. She used to say that Dad had to choose between two worlds, Jake added. That he chose the world of helping people over the world of having people, whatever that meant. Marcus felt a familiar pang of guilt. David's passion for social work had often clashed with their father's expectations for both sons to continue. Building the Richardson business empire, Marcus had chosen the corporate path, but David had rebelled, pursuing graduate degrees in social work and counseling instead of business or law. Did your mother ever talk about me specifically? Marcus asked. The boys looked uncomfortable. Sometimes, Danny admitted reluctantly. She said you and Dad were very different people, that you lived in a world where everything had a price, and Dad lived in a world where everything had value. The assessment stung because it contained truth Marcus was only beginning to acknowledge. His life had indeed become about prices, measurements, profits, and losses. David's world had been about intangible values, human connections, making differences in individual lives. She wasn't mean about it, Jake clarified quickly. More like sad. She said families sometimes grow apart when they want different things from life. Marcus's phone buzzed with a message from Thomas Chen. The background investigation was complete. At the same time, his assistant knocked and entered with an envelope from the DNA testing laboratory. Gentlemen, Marcus said, holding the sealed envelope, are you ready to learn the truth? Both boys nodded, though their tension was palpable. Marcus carefully opened the envelope and scanned the results. The technical language was definitive. 97% probability that Marcus Richardson and the twins shared a grandparent. They were, without question, his nephews. Well, Marcus said, setting down the document with a slight smile, it appears we're a family. The joy that transformed the twins' faces was worth every doubt and complication that would follow. Danny and Jake looked at each other, then back at Marcus, tears threatening to spill over. What does this mean? Jake asked quietly. It means you're not alone anymore, Marcus replied firmly. It means you have a family member who wants to help you build a future. It means we figure out how to honor your father's memory and your mother's wishes while making sure you have everything you need. Thomas Chen's report, which Marcus reviewed while the twins processed the DNA confirmation, painted a clearer picture of their parents' relationship. Sarah Fletcher had been a social worker at the same community center where David volunteered. They'd met while working with troubled teenagers, had fallen in love over shared cases and late-night strategy sessions about helping kids with nowhere else to turn. According to medical records, Sarah had discovered her pregnancy shortly after David had accepted a position with a larger organization that required extensive travel. The position would have doubled his salary and expanded his influence, but it would have meant leaving Chicago and the community work he'd built. Hospital records showed that Sarah had been admitted for pregnancy complications during the same week that David had been killed in the car accident while driving to a conference in Milwaukee. She'd been alone during the birth, had listed David as the father on the birth certificates, but had never pursued any claims against his estate. Employment records showed Sarah working multiple jobs throughout the twins' childhood, often in social services or community organizations. She'd moved frequently, staying in affordable neighborhoods while maintaining stable employment. The pattern suggested someone trying to stay connected to David's values while avoiding any appearance of seeking Richardson family support. Medical records from her final illness revealed the devastating reality of cancer treatment without adequate insurance. Bills that had consumed her savings, treatments that had ultimately proven futile, and a woman who had faced death knowing she was leaving her sons alone in the world. "Your mother was an extraordinary woman," Marcus told the twins as he finished reviewing the report. "She raised you while working full-time, kept your father's memory alive, and never asked for help, even when she desperately needed it." "She was the strongest person we knew," Danny replied. "Even at the end, she was more worried about us than herself. She made us promise to take care of each other," Jake added, "to never let anyone split us up." Marcus nodded, understanding the weight of that promise. "That's not going to happen. Your family and families stay together." The practical realities of sudden guardianship were daunting. Marcus had no experience with teenagers, no understanding of the daily rhythms of family life. His penthouse apartment was designed for corporate entertaining, not family living. His schedule was built around board meetings and business travel, not school events and homework supervision. But looking at these boys who shared his brother's determination and their mother's resilience, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since David's death: purpose beyond profit margins. "We need to talk about immediate arrangements," Marcus said. "Where you'll live, what school you'll attend, how we're going to make this work. We don't want to be a burden," Danny said quickly. "We can get jobs, help with expenses." "Absolutely not," Marcus replied firmly. "Your job is to be teenagers, to go to school, make friends, figure out what you want to do with your lives. Everything else is my responsibility now." The conversation was interrupted by Marcus's secretary announcing an urgent call. Douglas Richardson, Marcus's uncle, and the chairman of Richardson Industries' board of directors, was on the line with questions about yesterday's disrupted meeting. "Take a message," Marcus instructed. "I'll call him back later." But the interruption reminded him of the broader implications of his decision. The Richardson family had expectations, traditions, requirements that went beyond individual choices. Uncle Douglas, in particular, had strong opinions about maintaining the family's reputation and protecting the business from any hint of scandal or irregularity. The twins would need to be introduced to the extended family gradually, carefully. Their sudden appearance would raise questions about David's secret life, about Marcus's judgment, about the implications for Richardson Industries' leadership. "There's something you need to understand," Marcus told the boys. "Being part of the Richardson family comes with certain expectations and responsibilities. People will be interested in you, will want to know your story. Some of that attention will be positive, but some might not be." "We're not looking for attention," Jake replied. "We just wanted family." "I know, but family is complicated, especially when that family owns a company that employs thousands of people and makes decisions that affect entire communities. Your father understood those complications, which is probably why he kept you separate from this world." Marcus stood and walked to the window, organizing his thoughts. "I'm proposing something that your father might not have approved of. I want to bring you into the Richardson family completely. New schools, new opportunities, new responsibilities. But I also want to honor the values your mother taught you, the principles your father believed in." The twins listened carefully, processing the magnitude of what he was offering. "What kind of responsibilities?" Danny asked, his analytical mind already working through implications. "Eventually, if you're interested, involvement in Richardson Industries, understanding how business works, how wealth can be used responsibly. Your father believed in helping people. I'd like to find ways to combine that mission with the resources our family has access to." "We know about your company," Jake said quietly. "Mom showed us articles about you sometimes. She said you were brilliant, but that you'd forgotten why. Success mattered." The comment hit Marcus with unexpected force. What did she think success should be for? Making life better for people who don't have the same advantages, Danny replied. Mom said that's what Dad always believed, that wealth was a tool for solving problems, not just making more wealth. Marcus returned to his seat, struck by the wisdom of a woman he'd never met, but who clearly understood both Richardson brothers better than they'd understood themselves. Your mother was right, he admitted. I lost sight of that purpose somewhere along the way. Maybe having you here will help me remember. The morning continued with practical arrangements. Private tutors to assess their academic levels, appointments with adolescent counselors to help process their recent losses, meetings with attorneys to formalize guardianship arrangements. Marcus's staff moved with efficient precision, transforming his instructions into concrete plans. But the most important conversation was yet to come. Marcus needed to call Uncle Douglas, needed to prepare the family for the twins' existence, needed to navigate the political implications within Richardson Industries' leadership structure. Most challenging of all, he needed to understand what David would have wanted for his sons. The brother Marcus, remembered, had been idealistic but practical, passionate about justice but realistic about human nature. David had kept his family separate from the Richardson legacy for 8 years, but would he have wanted his sons to remain forever isolated from the resources and opportunities that came with their birthright? As the twins toured the Richardson Industries headquarters with his assistant, marveling at the research labs and community outreach programs Marcus had never paid much attention to, he began to see his own company through different eyes. David's sons were inheriting more than money. They were inheriting the power to shape communities, to influence lives, to continue their father's mission on a scale he'd never imagined possible. The phone call to Uncle Douglas would have to wait until Marcus had better answers to the questions that would inevitably follow. But first, he wanted to visit the community center where David and Sarah had met. Wanted to understand the world his brother had chosen over family expectations. The twins deserved to know they were part of something larger than corporate success. They deserved to understand that their father's values and their mother's sacrifice had prepared them for responsibilities that extended far beyond their own, security and comfort. As afternoon shadows lengthened across his office, Marcus Richardson began planning a future that would honor the past while building something entirely new. 2 teenage boys had walked into his boardroom, claiming to be his nephews. They were leaving as his sons in every way that mattered, carrying with them the hopes of a brother he'd lost and the dreams of a mother who'd trusted them with an impossible choice. The DNA test had confirmed their biological connection. The real test would be whether Marcus could become the uncle, the guardian, the family these boys deserved after years of facing the world alone. Marcus Richardson stood outside the Westside Community Center at 7 in the morning, watching as staff members unlocked doors and prepared for another day of serving Chicago's most vulnerable populations. The building was nothing like the gleaming towers of downtown where he spent his days. Paint peeled from window frames, the parking lot was more pothole than pavement, and security bars covered every ground floor window. Yet there was something alive about the place, a sense of purpose that resonated in the steady stream of people already gathering outside. The center's director, Maria Santos, had agreed to meet with him before regular hours. She was a compact woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much suffering to be impressed by expensive suits or corporate titles. When Marcus introduced himself, her expression shifted from professional courtesy to barely concealed hostility. "Richardson," she repeated, studying his face with uncomfortable intensity. "You have the same eyes as David, different everything else, but those eyes are identical." They walked through hallways lined with children's artwork and community announcements. The smell of industrial disinfectant couldn't quite mask the underlying odors of poverty and desperation. that clung to places where people came when they had nowhere else to turn. David volunteered here for 3 years, Maria explained, unlocking her office door. Best counselor we ever had. Kids trusted him instantly, parents respected him, staff adored him. Then one day he stopped coming. Marcus settled into a folding chair across from her battered desk. Do you know why he left? Maria's laugh held no humor. Same reason good people always leave places like this. Reality caught up with idealism. David wanted to save everyone, but the system kept defeating him. Kids he'd helped would end up back on the streets. Families he'd counseled would fall apart anyway. Programs he'd developed would lose funding. She pulled a file from her desk, drawer thick with papers and photographs. Sarah Fletcher started working here about 6 months after David did. Child Protective Services liaison. She was fresh out of graduate school, full of fire and determination to fix everything wrong with the world. Marcus studied the photographs Maria showed him. David and Sarah at a center fundraiser, both young and radiating the kind of optimism that came from believing hard work could overcome systemic inequality. David coaching a youth basketball team, his arm around a teenager who looked remarkably like the twins. Sarah leading a parenting workshop, her face animated with passion for her subject. They fell in love over case files, Maria continued. Stayed late every night planning interventions, arguing about best practices, sharing stories about the kids they were trying to help. Most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. 2 people who cared that much about making a difference. What changed? Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew part of the answer. David got recruited by Children's First Foundation, national organization, huge budget, chance to influence policy at the federal level. Everything he'd dreamed about when he was working here with donated supplies and volunteer help. Marcus felt the familiar weight of family expectations. He remembered David's excitement about the opportunity, remembered his own encouragement for his brother to think bigger, aim higher, make the kind of impact that befitted a Richardson. Sarah was pregnant by then, Maria said quietly. About 4 months along, she was terrified but excited, already making plans for how they'd balance careers and parenthood. David was torn between the opportunity and staying here with her. He chose the opportunity. He chose what he thought was the greater good. Classic David Richardson move. Save the world, sacrifice the personal relationships. Maria's voice carried 8 years of accumulated frustration. Sarah tried to be supportive, told him to take the position, insisted they'd figure out the rest. Marcus studied another photograph, this one showing Sarah at what appeared to be a baby shower, surrounded by center staff and community members. Her smile was radiant but strained, the expression of someone working hard to appear happy. The night before David was supposed to start his new job, Sarah went into early labor. Complications, emergency cesarean section, twins instead of the single baby they'd been expecting. David was at some orientation retreat in Wisconsin, unreachable. The timeline was becoming clearer and more devastating. The car accident, Highway 94, about an hour outside Milwaukee. David was driving back to Chicago when he got the message about Sarah being in labor. State police said he was doing 90 in a snowstorm. Maria closed the file. Sarah spent 3 days in intensive care, not knowing if she was a widow or just abandoned. Marcus absorbed the cruel timing of it all. David racing home to his family, dying alone on a dark highway, while Sarah fought for her life, and the twins struggled in neonatal intensive care. 2 people who loved each other, separated by circumstance and poor communication at the moment, when they needed each other most. Why didn't she contact our family after David died? Marcus asked. She had to have known about the Richardson resources, especially with newborn twins and medical bills. Maria's expression hardened further. She tried, called your company, left messages, sent letters. Some secretary told her that David's personal affairs were not Richardson Industries' concern and that any claims against his estate needed to go through proper legal channels. The words hit Marcus like physical blows. He could picture Vivian Hughes, his father's longtime secretary, dismissing Sarah's calls with corporate efficiency. Vivian had been protective of the Richardson family's privacy, viewing most outside contact as potential threats to be neutralized. Sarah was 24 years old, Maria continued. She'd just buried the father of her children, was facing bankruptcy from medical bills, and was trying to care for premature twins on her own. Your family's lawyers made it clear that pursuing any claims would result in a lengthy, expensive legal battle she couldn't afford. Marcus felt sick. While he'd been consumed with grief over David's death and pressure to assume greater responsibilities within Richardson Industries, his brother's family had been struggling for survival just miles away. The center helped as much as we could, Maria said. Community donations, volunteer childcare, connections to social services. Sarah moved to a smaller apartment, took 3 part-time jobs, finished raising those boys while working herself to exhaustion. She never remarried. Never even dated seriously. Said she'd had her one great love and wouldn't settle for anything less meaningful. Maria stood up, signaling the end of their conversation. Those boys grew up hearing stories about their father's dedication to helping others. They volunteered here every summer once they were old enough, same passion for service David had. As they walked back through the center's hallways, now filling with the day's first clients, Marcus noticed details he'd missed earlier. A memorial wall featuring photographs of community members who died too young, including a small plaque honoring David's contributions. A youth reading program named after Sarah Fletcher. Evidence that his brother and Sarah had left lasting impacts on this community despite their brief time here. Mr. Richardson, Maria called as he reached the door. Those boys are good kids. They've had to grow up too fast, lost too much too young. If you're planning to make their lives more complicated, maybe it would be better to leave them alone. The warning was clear, but Marcus had already made his decision. I'm going to take care of them. That's what David would have wanted. David wanted a lot of things, Maria replied. Most of them were impossible. Driving back downtown, Marcus called his assistant with instructions to arrange meetings with the city's best educational consultants. Danny and Jake would need comprehensive assessments to determine their academic levels and identify any gaps that needed addressing. They'd been attending public schools in marginal neighborhoods, moving frequently as Sarah's financial situation changed. Their transcripts showed adequate grades, but limited opportunities for advanced coursework or extracurricular activities. Richardson Industries maintained relationships with several elite private schools in the Chicago area. Marcus had served on the board of trustees at Lincoln Academy, where his own education had been carefully managed to prepare him for eventual leadership roles. The school emphasized academic excellence, character development, and social responsibility. It would be perfect for the twins if they could handle the transition from their current environment. But first, Marcus needed to address the more immediate challenge of introducing Danny and Jake to the extended Richardson family. Uncle Douglas had been leaving increasingly urgent messages, demanding explanations for yesterday's disrupted board meeting and Marcus's sudden unavailability. The family patriarch was not accustomed to being ignored, especially when Richardson Industries' leadership structure was involved. Douglas Richardson occupied the penthouse office of the building that bore the family name, though he'd gradually transferred most operational responsibilities to Marcus over the past 5 years. At 73, he remained sharp and imposing, with silver hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention in any room. He'd built his reputation on protecting The Richardson legacy, through careful planning and absolute control over family affairs. "Explain to me," Douglas said without preamble when Marcus entered his office, "why my nephew cancelled a crucial board meeting to deal with what I'm told were two teenage boys making wild claims about family connections." Marcus had prepared for this conversation, but facing his uncle's skeptical expression reminded him of similar confrontations throughout his childhood. Douglas had served as surrogate father after Marcus's parents died, had shaped his understanding of duty and responsibility, had taught him that being a Richardson meant making difficult choices for the greater good. "They're David's sons," Marcus said simply, placing the DNA test results on Douglas's desk. "Twin boys, 16 years old. Their mother died 6 months ago, and they've been on their own since then." Douglas studied the documents with the same meticulous attention he'd once applied to corporate acquisitions. "Assuming this is accurate, where have these children been for the past 16 years? Why are we only learning about them now?" Marcus explained what he'd learned from Maria Santos, from the background investigation, from his conversations with the twins themselves. Douglas listened without interruption, his expression growing more troubled with each revelation. "So David had children he never mentioned to anyone in his family," Douglas summarized. "This woman raised them alone, refused to seek our help, and now they've appeared at our doorstep claiming their inheritance." "They're not claiming anything," Marcus corrected. "They're homeless teenagers who discovered they had an uncle and came looking for family, not money." "Don't be naive," Douglas replied sharply. "These boys may be sincere, but they're also 16 years old with no resources and no other options. Of course they'll present themselves in the most sympathetic light possible." The cynicism stung because Marcus recognized his own historical response to similar situations. Before meeting Danny and Jake, he would have approached their claims with the same caution, the same assumption that everyone had an angle they were working. "What would you have me do?" Marcus asked. "Turn away David's children because their timing is inconvenient?" "I would have you proceed carefully," Douglas replied. "These boys represent potential complications for Richardson Industries. Questions about David's secret life, speculation about what other hidden family members might emerge, concerns about the stability of our leadership structure. The leadership structure is fine. I'm making provisions for their care and education, not handing them control of the company." Douglas walked to his window, studying the Chicago skyline with the same possessive pride Marcus had inherited. "The Richardson name carries weight, Marcus. It carries expectations and responsibilities. When you adopt these boys into our family, you're not just changing their lives. You're changing how the world perceives us, how our competitors view us, how our shareholders evaluate our decision-making. Since when do we make family decisions based on shareholder perceptions? Since our family became a publicly traded entity with fiduciary obligations to thousands of investors," Douglas replied firmly. "Everything we do reflects on Richardson Industries. These boys' backgrounds, their mother's poverty, their father's alienation from family expectations, all of it will become public knowledge eventually." Marcus had anticipated this argument, but hearing it articulated made him realize how far he'd drifted from his uncle's worldview in just 2 days. The twins had reminded him that the Richardson legacy wasn't just about stock prices and quarterly earnings. It was about using wealth and influence to make positive differences in people's lives. "What if the publicity is positive?" Marcus suggested. "What if bringing David's sons into the family demonstrates our commitment to social responsibility and family values?" "What if it doesn't?" Douglas countered. "What if competitors use their story to suggest that Richardson Industries is distracted by personal drama? What if shareholders question whether you're emotionally equipped to make rational business decisions?" The conversation was interrupted by a knock on Douglas's door. His secretary entered with an apologetic expression and an urgent message. Reporters from the Chicago Tribune and Sun-Times were calling with questions about the Richardson family's newest members. Somehow, news of the twins' existence had already leaked to the media. Douglas's expression darkened as he processed the implications. How many people knew about this situation? Marcus reviewed the previous day's events, counting the individuals who'd been present when the twins appeared in the boardroom. 23 board members, plus security staff, his assistant hotel personnel who'd processed the twins' accommodation arrangements. Any one of them could have shared information with friends, family members, or media contacts. "This is exactly what I was concerned about," Douglas said. "The story is already beyond our control, being shaped by people who don't understand the full context." Marcus's phone rang with a call from his corporate communications director. Media outlets were seeking official statements about Richardson Industries' CEO adopting his deceased brother's children. Social media was already buzzing with speculation about hidden family dramas and corporate succession plans. "We need to get ahead of this," Marcus said, more to himself than to his uncle. "We need to minimize the damage," Douglas corrected. "Issue a brief statement acknowledging that you're providing temporary assistance to distant relatives while longer-term arrangements are finalized. Keep it vague, keep it temporary, keep the focus on corporate business rather than family drama." The suggestion felt like a betrayal of everything Marcus had promised the twins the night before. They'd trusted him with their vulnerability, had believed his assurances about family and belonging. Now his uncle was recommending that he characterize them as distant relatives receiving temporary assistance. "I'm not minimizing their importance to accommodate media speculation," Marcus said firmly. "Then you're allowing emotion to cloud your judgment," Douglas replied. "These boys have been surviving on their own for months. They'll continue surviving regardless of how we characterize their relationship to our family." The comment revealed the fundamental difference in their approaches to the situation. Douglas viewed the twins as a problem to be managed, potential threats to be neutralized. Marcus was beginning to see them as opportunities to reconnect with the values that had originally motivated the Richardson family's success. "I need to get back to them," Marcus said, gathering the DNA results and background investigation materials. "They're probably seeing news reports and wondering if I'm having second thoughts." "Maybe you should be having second thoughts," Douglas called as Marcus reached the door. "Once you officially bring these boys into the family, there's no going back. Their problems become our problems. Their choices reflect on our reputation. Their futures become permanently intertwined with Richardson Industries' legacy." Marcus paused, considering his uncle's warnings. Everything Douglas said was true. The twins would indeed become permanent parts of the Richardson story, for better or worse. Their backgrounds would be scrutinized, their characters evaluated, their worthiness debated by people who'd never met them. But walking away wasn't an option. Marcus had seen the hope in their eyes when the DNA results confirmed their connection. He'd heard the love in their voices when they talked about David and Sarah. He'd witnessed their resilience in the face of devastating losses and uncertain futures. Most importantly, he'd glimpsed the man he could become if he followed their example of choosing family over convenience, values over calculations. "You're right about one thing," Marcus told his uncle. "There's no going back, but maybe that's exactly what this family needs." The drive back to his penthouse gave Marcus time to process the morning's revelations and plan his next steps. The twins would need more than private schools and trust funds. They would need guidance about navigating the complexities of wealth and privilege, protection from media scrutiny and public judgment, and most importantly, assurance that their value to the Richardson family wasn't conditional on their ability to conform to others' expectations. Marcus's penthouse apartment occupied the top 2 floors of a building overlooking Millennium Park. The space had been professionally decorated to impress corporate visitors and social contacts with modern furniture, expensive artwork, and expansive views of Lake Michigan. It was beautiful, comfortable, and completely unsuitable for raising teenagers. Danny and Jake were waiting in the living room, still wearing yesterday's clothes, but freshly showered and obviously trying to appear presentable. They stood when Marcus entered, their body language tense with anxiety about news reports they'd undoubtedly seen. "We heard there were reporters asking questions," Danny said without preamble. "If our being here is causing problems for you, we can leave." The offer broke Marcus's heart. These boys, who'd finally found family after months of uncertainty, were prepared to sacrifice their own security to protect his reputation. It was exactly the kind of selfless thinking David would have admired, the kind of character Sarah had instilled in them despite every hardship they'd faced. "You're not going anywhere," Marcus replied firmly. "The media attention is temporary, but family is permanent. We'll deal with the reporters together." Relief flooded their faces, followed immediately by concern about the implications of public scrutiny. "Are people going to be watching us all the time now?" Jake asked. "For a while, probably. Being part of the Richardson family means living with a certain amount of public interest. But you'll have privacy, security, normal teenage experiences. The attention will fade once people realize you're just regular kids who happen to have an extraordinary father." Marcus spent the next hour explaining the realities of wealth and privilege, the responsibilities that came with the Richardson name, the opportunities that would be available to them as David's sons. He outlined his plans for their education, living arrangements, and gradual introduction to Richardson Industries operations. But the most important conversation centered on their father's legacy and how they wanted to honor his memory through their own choices and actions. "Dad believed that success meant helping people who couldn't help themselves," Danny said. "That's what Mom taught us, and that's what we want to keep doing. Even if it means dealing with media attention and family expectations," Marcus asked. "Especially then," Jake replied. "If we have access to resources Dad never had, we should use them the way he would have wanted." Their maturity continued to amaze Marcus. These were 16-year-old boys who'd lost both parents, had survived months of uncertainty and poverty, yet remained focused on serving others rather than securing their own comfort. The remainder of the afternoon was devoted to practical arrangements. Educational consultants arrived to assess the twins' academic levels and recommend appropriate school placements. A family counselor specializing in grief and transitions met with all three of them to discuss healthy ways of processing recent changes. Interior designers began planning modifications to Marcus's apartment to accommodate teenage residents. Most importantly, Marcus's attorneys worked on finalizing guardianship arrangements and establishing educational trusts that would ensure the twins' security regardless of future circumstances. As evening approached, Marcus found himself cooking dinner for the first time in years. The penthouse's kitchen was designed for entertaining rather than family meals, but he managed to prepare a simple pasta dish while the twins explored their new surroundings. "This place is incredible," Jake called from the balcony overlooking Millennium Park. "You can see the whole city from here." "Dad would have loved this view," Danny added, joining his brother outside. "He used to take us to the lakefront sometimes, tell us stories about all the people living in those buildings, all the dreams and struggles happening behind every window." Marcus joined them on the balcony, watching the city lights begin to twinkle in the gathering dusk. "What kind of stories did he tell?" "Hopeful ones," Danny replied. "About families working together to overcome challenges, about communities supporting each other through difficult times, about people choosing to help rather than just looking out for themselves." The description sounded like the David that Marcus remembered from their childhood, before family expectations and business pressures had driven them apart. His brother had always been the optimist, the idealist, the one who believed in people's fundamental goodness, despite evidence to the contrary. "Your father was a better man than I've been," Marcus admitted. "But maybe having you here will help me remember what he understood about what really matters." Dinner conversation revealed more about the twins' personalities and aspirations. Danny was analytical, drawn to understanding systems and solving complex problems. He asked thoughtful questions about Richardson Industries' structure, its community, impact programs, its approach to corporate social responsibility. Jake was more intuitive, interested in individual stories and personal connections. He wanted to know about Marcus's childhood with David, about family traditions, about what their father had been like before he'd chosen his independent path. Both boys were hungry for information about their Richardson heritage while remaining loyal to the values Sarah had taught them. They understood that wealth brought opportunities, but also obligations. They were excited about educational possibilities, but concerned about maintaining connections to the communities where they'd grown up. After dinner, Marcus showed them photographs from his own childhood with David. Pictures of family vacations, school events, holiday gatherings. The twins studied each image intently, searching for clues about their father's character and their own place in the Richardson family story. "He looks happy in these early pictures," Jake observed, pointing to a photograph of David at age 12, grinning beside a Christmas tree. "He was happy," Marcus replied. "We both were, until our parents died and everything became about responsibility and legacy preservation." "What changed?" Danny asked. Marcus considered how to explain the gradual transformation that had occurred. After their parents' death in a plane crash when he was 22 and David was 18, how Douglas's guidance had emphasized duty over personal fulfillment, how business demands had consumed increasing amounts of time and energy, how success had become defined by measurable achievements rather than meaningful relationships. "I became so focused on building something that would make our parents proud that I forgot why they'd wanted us to succeed in the first place," Marcus said finally. "Your father remembered. That's why he chose different priorities." "But you're successful," Jake pointed out. "Richardson Industries helps thousands of people through jobs and community programs." Success without relationships isn't really success," Marcus replied, echoing something David had said during their last argument. "Your father understood that. I'm just starting to learn it." The evening ended with practical discussions about the twins' immediate needs: shopping for clothes, shoes, and personal items, scheduling medical and dental checkups, arranging transportation to various appointments and activities. The mundane details of caring for teenagers, which Marcus was discovering required more organization than most corporate mergers. But beneath the practical arrangements lay deeper questions about family dynamics, identity, and belonging. The twins were navigating not just the transition from poverty to privilege, but the more complex challenge of honoring their mother's memory while embracing their father's legacy. They needed to maintain their core values while adapting to radically different circumstances. Marcus was facing his own identity crisis, realizing that everything he'd built since David's death had been motivated more by guilt and obligation than by genuine passion or purpose. The twins represented a chance to reconnect with the idealism he'd inherited from his parents and shared with his brother before life had taught them both that dreams were luxuries they couldn't afford. As the boys settled into their temporary bedrooms, Marcus sat in his study reviewing the day's developments. Media attention would intensify before it diminished. Family members would express opinions about his decisions. Business associates would evaluate whether his judgment had been compromised by emotional considerations. But none of that mattered as much as the sound of teenage voices down the hall, discussing their father's character and planning their own futures. For the first time since David's death, Marcus Richardson's home felt like more than just an expensive place to sleep between business obligations. The twins had brought something invaluable into his carefully controlled world: the possibility of redemption, the opportunity to honor his brother's memory through actions rather than regrets, and the chance to build a family legacy based on love rather than just financial success. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more difficult decisions, and increasingly complex responsibilities. But tonight, Marcus allowed himself to feel something he hadn't experienced in 8 years: hope for a future that included more than just corporate achievements and personal wealth. The Richardson family was about to expand in ways that would test everyone's understanding of what really mattered. The question was whether they would rise to meet those challenges together, or whether the weight of expectations and external pressures would fracture the fragile bonds they were just beginning to build. The emergency board meeting convened. At 6 in the morning, 3 days after the twins' arrival, had become front-page news across Chicago's business publications. Marcus sat at the head of the polished conference table, studying the faces of Richardson Industries' most influential directors. Their expressions ranged from concerned to openly hostile, united only in their demand for explanations about the company's sudden family drama. Douglas Richardson commanded attention from his position at the opposite end of the table, having orchestrated this confrontation with the precision of a military strategist. Beside him sat Eleanor Hayes, Richardson Industries' longest-serving board member and Marcus's former mentor. Her disappointment was particularly painful because she'd been instrumental in preparing him for leadership after his parents' death. "The situation has become untenable," Douglas began without preamble. "Richardson Industries' stock price has dropped 12% in 3 days. Our competitors are circulating rumors about leadership instability. Major clients are requesting reassurances about management continuity." Marcus had expected the financial implications, though the speed of market reaction was sobering. The stock fluctuation is temporary. Investors will recognize that personal family matters don't affect our operational capabilities. Personal family matters that involve secretly adopting 2 teenage boys with complicated backgrounds, Eleanor interrupted. "Marcus, we've known each other for 15 years. I've never questioned your judgment before, but this decision seems impulsive and poorly considered." The criticism stung because Eleanor's opinion mattered to him. She'd been his father's closest business partner, had guided Marcus through his early leadership challenges, and had consistently supported his strategic decisions. Her concern carried weight that went beyond corporate politics. "These boys are David's sons," Marcus replied firmly. "That makes them family, not a business decision to be evaluated by quarterly projections. But your response to their appearance has become a business issue," board member Robert Chen interjected. He was Richardson Industries' chief financial officer, a meticulous man whose loyalty to the company superseded all personal considerations. "The media speculation is affecting employee morale, client confidence, and investor stability." Marcus reviewed the morning's financial reports spread across the table. The numbers were troubling, but not catastrophic. Richardson Industries remained fundamentally strong, with diverse revenue streams and solid market positioning. The current turbulence reflected uncertainty rather than actual operational problems. "What specific concerns are clients expressing?" Marcus asked. "Questions about succession planning," Eleanor replied. "These boys will presumably inherit significant stakes in the company. Clients want to understand how that affects long-term strategic direction. They're 16 years old. Any inheritance implications are decades away. But their presence in your household immediately affects your decision-making priorities," Douglas said. You've already missed 3 important meetings, postponed the Nakamura negotiations, and diverted corporate resources to personal matters. The accusations were accurate, though Marcus resented the implication that caring for his nephews represented a dereliction of duty. I've delegated responsibilities appropriately while addressing an urgent family situation. A family situation that didn't exist until 3 days ago, board member Patricia Williams observed. She was the company's chief legal counsel, trained to identify potential liabilities and minimize corporate exposure. These boys' sudden appearance raises questions about what other hidden complications might emerge from David's past. The meeting continued for 2 hours, with board members expressing variations of the same concerns. Marcus's judgment was being questioned, his priorities challenged, his fitness for leadership evaluated through the lens of financial performance and shareholder value. Every argument was logical, defensible, and completely missed the human elements that had motivated his decisions. During a brief recess, Marcus stepped onto the building's roof garden to collect his thoughts. The Chicago skyline stretched toward Lake Michigan, a testament to ambition and achievement that had inspired him throughout his career. But today, the view reminded him of his conversation with the twins about their father's stories of hope and community behind every window. Douglas joined him at the railing, his expression softer than it had been during the formal meeting. "I'm not trying to be cruel, Marcus, but you're risking everything our family has built for children you've known for 3 days. They're David's children, that should matter. It does matter, but not more than our responsibilities to employees, shareholders, and communities that depend on Richardson Industries' continued success." Douglas paused, choosing his words carefully. "Your father would have made the practical choice." The comment struck at Marcus's deepest insecurities about living up to family expectations. His father had been a formidable businessman, capable of making difficult decisions without allowing personal emotions to compromise corporate interests. Marcus had spent his entire career trying to earn comparable respect and authority. "My father also believed that success meant more than stock prices," Marcus replied. He established community outreach programs, employee benefit packages, and charitable foundations because he understood that business success should benefit everyone, not just shareholders. All of which remain intact, regardless of your personal family arrangements, Douglas pointed out. But jeopardizing the company's stability threatens all those programs and the people they serve. The argument was persuasive because it contained truth. Richardson Industries' community impact depended on the company's continued profitability and growth. If Marcus's decisions undermined that success, he would indeed be harming the very communities David had dedicated his life to serving. But walking away from the twins would betray every value David had embodied, every lesson about family loyalty and moral courage that their parents had taught both brothers. The meeting resumed with a formal proposal from the board. Marcus would issue a public statement clarifying that the twins were receiving temporary assistance, while permanent arrangements were finalized through appropriate social service channels. He would delegate their care to professional guardians while maintaining appropriate financial support. Most importantly, he would recommit fully to his corporate responsibilities without further distractions. "This isn't about abandoning the boys," Eleanor explained. "It's about acknowledging that effective leadership requires clear priorities and professional boundaries." Marcus studied the faces around the table, recognizing genuine concern alongside calculated self-interest. These people had worked with him for years, had supported his leadership during previous challenges, and sincerely believed they were protecting the company's best interests. The problem was that their definition of best interests excluded the values that had originally motivated Richardson Industries' success. His grandfather had started the company to provide quality products at fair prices while creating good jobs for working families. His father had expanded those principles to include community development and social responsibility. Somewhere along the way, those founding principles had been subordinated to financial metrics and shareholder returns. "I need time to consider your recommendations," Marcus said finally. "Time we don't have," Douglas replied. "The market opens in 2 hours. We need a clear statement about company leadership and priorities before trading begins." Marcus left the meeting without providing the commitment the board demanded. Instead, he drove directly to Lincoln Academy, where the twins were completing their first day of classes. The exclusive private school occupied a sprawling campus in Chicago's northern suburbs with ivy-covered buildings, manicured lawns, and the kind of educational resources that prepared students for leadership positions in business, government, and academia. Danny and Jake were waiting in the headmaster's office, looking uncomfortable in their new uniforms, but maintaining the dignified posture they'd inherited from both parents. Dr. Margaret Foster, Lincoln Academy's longtime headmaster, greeted Marcus with enthusiasm about the twins' academic potential and adjustment to their new environment. "Remarkable young men," she reported. "Their academic preparation has some gaps, but their intellectual curiosity and work ethic are exceptional. More importantly, they've handled the transition with remarkable maturity." Marcus felt pride mixed with renewed determination to protect these boys from the calculating pressures he'd just experienced in the boardroom. They deserved the opportunity to be teenagers, to focus on education and personal growth without bearing responsibility for corporate stock prices or adult political maneuvering. The drive home gave Marcus time to discuss the day's experiences with Danny and Jake. They were excited about their new school, impressed by the facilities and educational opportunities, but also concerned about fitting in with classmates from dramatically different backgrounds. "Everyone's been nice," Danny reported, "but we can tell they're curious about our story. Some of them have obviously read the newspaper articles." "How does that make you feel?" Marcus asked. "Weird," Jake admitted. "Like we're famous for something we didn't choose. We're just trying to go to school and figure out our lives." Their perspective reminded Marcus of his own teenage years, when every achievement or mistake had been evaluated through the lens of Richardson family expectations. The pressure to live up to inherited legacies was difficult enough without additional media scrutiny and public judgment. "There's something I need to tell you," Marcus said as they entered his penthouse apartment. "The Richardson Industries board is concerned about the media attention surrounding your arrival. They're recommending that I step back from your direct care to focus on business responsibilities." The twins' expressions shifted from curiosity to alarm. "You mean send us away?" Danny asked. "Not send you away. Arrange professional guardianship while maintaining financial support for your education and living expenses." "But not family," Jake said quietly. "Not what you promised." The hurt in their voices crystallized Marcus's understanding of what was really at stake. This wasn't about business metrics or shareholder confidence. It was about whether he would honor his commitment to these boys or prioritize corporate demands over moral obligations. "I haven't agreed to anything," Marcus assured them, "but I want you to understand the pressures we're facing and help me think through the best response." They spent the evening discussing options and implications. The twins were remarkably sophisticated in their analysis of the situation, recognizing both the legitimate business concerns and the deeper questions about family loyalty and personal integrity. "Dad faced similar choices," Danny observed. He could have stayed with the community center where he was making a real difference in individual lives, or taken the foundation job where he might have influenced policy on a national level. He chose what he thought was the greater good, Jake added, but it cost him his family. I'm not going to make the same mistake, Marcus replied firmly. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent call from Thomas Chen, Marcus's private investigator. Mr. Richardson, we have a problem. Someone's been feeding information to the media about the twins' background, their mother's financial struggles, details about David's relationship with Sarah, information that wasn't publicly available. Marcus felt cold realization settle. In his stomach, someone with access to confidential files, someone who knew exactly what information would be most damaging to your reputation and the company's stability. The implications were staggering. The media leak hadn't been accidental or opportunistic. Someone had deliberately orchestrated the release of private family information to create pressure for Marcus to distance himself from the twins. Do you know who? Marcus asked. I'm still investigating, but the pattern suggests someone with inside access to Richardson Industries' executive communications and board discussions. After ending the call, Marcus reviewed the timeline of media coverage more carefully. The articles weren't random gossip pieces. They contained specific details about Sarah's medical bills, David's community center work, and the twins' school records. Information that could only have been obtained through careful investigation or inside knowledge. Someone had weaponized the twins' story to undermine Marcus's position, using their vulnerability as leverage in a corporate power struggle. The realization transformed Marcus's understanding of the board meeting and the pressure he'd been receiving. This wasn't just about business concerns or leadership priorities. Someone was actively working to separate him from his nephews, using the same tactical approach that had isolated David from his family years earlier. Marcus called an emergency, meeting with his most trusted advisors, people whose loyalty transcended corporate politics. His head of security, his personal attorney, and his longtime assistant gathered in his study while the twins worked on homework in their rooms. Someone's orchestrating this campaign, Marcus explained, sharing Thomas Chen's preliminary findings. The media leaks, the board pressure, the timing of everything. It's too coordinated to be coincidental. Who benefits from separating you from the boys? Asked Patricia Rodriguez, his personal attorney. Marcus considered the question carefully. The obvious answer was anyone who viewed the twins as threats to existing power structures or inheritance arrangements. But the sophistication of the campaign suggested someone with intimate knowledge of Richardson Industries' operations and significant resources to invest in the effort. Douglas has the most to lose if I formally adopt the twins, Marcus admitted, reluctantly. As my uncle, he's currently my primary heir. Danny and Jake would change those dynamics significantly. The possibility that his own uncle might be behind the attacks felt like a betrayal of everything Marcus had believed about family loyalty. Douglas had guided him through the most difficult period of his life, had taught him about leadership and responsibility, had served as surrogate father when Marcus needed guidance most. But Douglas had also consistently prioritized Richardson Industries' interests over personal relationships, had supported the isolation that had driven David away from the family, and had reacted to the twins' appearance with calculation rather than compassion. We need more evidence before making accusations, Patricia advised. But if Douglas is behind this, you need to be prepared for a full-scale corporate war. The investigation continued through the night, with Thomas Chen's team tracing the source of leaked information, while Marcus's advisors developed strategies for protecting both the twins and his position within Richardson Industries. By morning, the evidence was conclusive. Douglas Richardson had been systematically providing confidential information to media contacts, coordinating with board members to build pressure for Marcus to abandon the twins, and working behind the scenes to position himself as the stable leadership alternative if Marcus's judgment was deemed compromised. The betrayal was devastating, but not entirely surprising. Douglas had spent decades building Richardson Industries into a corporate empire, sacrificing personal relationships and family connections for business success. The twins represented everything he'd taught Marcus to avoid: emotional decision-making, public vulnerability, and divided loyalties between family and corporate interests. Confronting Douglas required careful planning and strategic thinking. Marcus couldn't simply accuse his uncle without providing evidence, but he also couldn't allow the attacks on his nephews to continue. The confrontation took place in Douglas's penthouse office, with panoramic views of the city. Both men had devoted their lives to serving through Richardson Industries' success. Douglas maintained his composure even when presented with evidence of his media manipulation and board coordination. "Everything I've done has been to protect this company and preserve the Richardson legacy," Douglas said, without denial or apology. "You're jeopardizing everything our family has built for children who represent nothing but complications and distractions." "They represent David's legacy and our family's future," Marcus replied firmly. "David's legacy is failure and abandonment," Douglas shot back. He chose idealism over responsibility, walked away from family obligations, and died alone on a highway running back to responsibilities he should never have abandoned in the first place. The cruelty of the assessment revealed the depth of Douglas's resentment toward David's choices and his determination to prevent Marcus from following a similar path. "David died trying to reach his family when they needed him most," Marcus corrected. "He made the choice you taught us both to avoid. He chose love over duty. And look where it got him. Look where it got his wife and children. 9 years of poverty and struggle that could have been avoided if he'd honored his obligations to this family." The argument continued for hours, touching on fundamental questions about success, responsibility, and the meaning of family legacy. Douglas remained convinced that corporate achievement and social standing mattered more than personal relationships. Marcus had begun to understand that wealth without connection, success without love, was ultimately meaningless. The confrontation ended with Douglas's resignation from Richardson Industries' board, his removal from all executive decision-making roles, and his voluntary relinquishment of inheritance rights that would have positioned him as Marcus's successor. "You're choosing sentiment over substance," Douglas warned as he packed his personal belongings. "These boys will never understand the sacrifices required to maintain what we've built. They'll waste the Richardson legacy on naive idealism, just like their father did." "Maybe that's exactly what the Richardson legacy needs," Marcus replied. The aftermath of Douglas's departure required extensive damage control and strategic repositioning. Marcus addressed Richardson Industries employees directly, explaining his commitment both to the company's continued success and to honoring family obligations that reflected the values the company was founded on. Media coverage gradually shifted from speculation about corporate instability to recognition of Marcus's integrity in prioritizing family loyalty over political convenience. Stock prices recovered as investors recognized that Richardson Industries' fundamental strength remained intact despite leadership changes. Most importantly, the twins were able to continue their education and adjustment without the pressure of ongoing media scrutiny or family political maneuvering. 6 months later, the Richardson family gathered for Thanksgiving dinner in Marcus's newly renovated penthouse. The apartment had been transformed from a corporate showplace into a genuine home with comfortable furniture, family photographs, and the kind of warmth that comes from shared meals and honest conversations. Danny and Jake had thrived at Lincoln Academy, excelling academically while maintaining the values Sarah had taught them about service and community responsibility. They'd also begun working part-time at the West Side Community Center, continuing their father's mission of helping at-risk youth while learning about the community organizing work that had shaped their parents' relationship. Marcus had restructured Richardson Industries to emphasize social responsibility and community impact, establishing new programs that combined profitable business practices with meaningful community development. The changes had improved both employee satisfaction and public reputation, demonstrating that ethical leadership could enhance rather than compromise corporate success. The Thanksgiving conversation focused on plans for the future, including the twins' college aspirations and their potential roles in Richardson Industries' continued evolution. Both boys expressed interest in business education, but with the clear intention of using those skills to advance their father's mission of helping underserved communities. "Dad would be proud of how you've honored his memory," Danny told Marcus during a quiet moment after dinner. "Your mother would be proud of how you've honored hers," Marcus replied. The evening ended with Marcus reflecting on the transformation that had occurred since two teenage boys had burst into his boardroom, claiming to be his nephews. They challenged everything he thought he knew about success, family, and personal fulfillment. They'd reminded him that the Richardson legacy wasn't just about financial achievement, but about using wealth and influence to make positive differences in people's lives. Most importantly, they'd given him the family he'd lost when David died, the connection and purpose that had been missing from his carefully controlled but ultimately empty existence. The DNA test had confirmed their biological relationship, but the real test had been whether Marcus could become the uncle, guardian, and family member these boys deserved. The answer had required him to choose love over calculation, connection over control, and values over convenience. As he watched Danny and Jake planning their homework schedules and discussing weekend plans with the casual confidence of teenagers who finally felt secure and supported, Marcus understood that he'd gained far more than he'd risked. The Richardson family legacy would continue through these remarkable young men who carried their father's idealism, their mother's strength, and their uncle's resources. Together, they would build something better than any of them could have achieved alone. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.